So last week, we finished up chapter 25. If you remember, 25 started off with the death of Samuel. Then it went through the story of David and Nabal, which Nabal was a wicked man. And then at the end of it, David ends up marrying Abigail, who is Nabal's widow. And Saul gives Michal, David's first wife, to Palti. And so basically Saul is treating David as if he's already dead. And so we have this situation kind of building. And in chapter 26, starting in verse 1, it says, "Now the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, 'Is David not hiding in the hall of Hicklah opposite Jershmun?'" I'm sorry, hill. I said hall. Hill of Hicklah opposite Jeshimon. Then Saul rose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, having 3,000 chosen men of Israel with him, to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul encamped in the hill of Hicklah, which is opposite Jeshimon by the road. But David stayed in the wilderness, and he saw that Saul had come after him into the wilderness. David therefore sent out spies and understood that Saul had indeed come. So David's still operating under the last understanding in chapter 24. If you remember, Saul said, "Surely I'm not going to kill you, don't worry, because you spared my life. I'm not going to come and try and kill you anymore. Surely I know that you're going to be king," all of that stuff. So David's still operating under that. Then the wonderful Ziphites. In chapter 23, these are the same people that went to Saul the first time and said, "Hey, David's hiding over here." And so Saul went and charged him. These guys have gone again and decided to tell Saul, "Hey, David's over here again." And so Saul comes out with his 3,000 choice men, soldiers from Israel, ready to chase down David. And so David hears about it, and he sees the army and says that he kind of wonders, is this really Saul coming after me again? And so he sends out some spies to kind of go out and scout around and make sure that this is really Saul and his army. And so they see it, they come back, they tell David, and so David understands that Saul has indeed come out against him once again. So he sees the pattern starting to happen. So David arose, in verse 5 it says, "So David arose and came to the place where Saul had encamped, and David saw the place where Saul lay, and Abner the son of Ner, the commander of his army. Now Saul lay within the camp, and the people encamped all around him. Then David answered and said to Ahimelech the Hittite, and to Abishai the son of Zeruiah, brother of Joab, saying, 'Who will go down with me to Saul in the camp?'" This is interesting. So everyone is laying down. So you know that it's nighttime. Everyone's getting ready for bed. They've all laid down. They've gone to sleep. David goes, and he goes himself to look at the camp. And with him, he has Ahimelech the Hittite, who is not the priest. Different Ahimelech here. And he also has with him Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, who is the brother of Joab. Just so you know, Zeruiah, that's David's sister. So these are his nephews. And so he's standing there, and he says to the two men, "Who wants to go down to the camp? I want to go down to the camp and see what's going on." And they see the way Saul is in the center of the camp, and everyone's sleeping around him. And so it's almost this impossible idea. You want to go down into the camp to see Saul? Really? He's at the center of the camp. Everyone's sleeping right around him. And David's like, "Who wants to go down?" Well, Ahimelech doesn't respond. But Abishai does. There at the end of the verse it says, "And Abishai said, 'I will go down with you.' Verse 7 says, So David and Abishai came to the people by night, and there Saul lay sleeping within the camp, with his spear stuck in the ground by his head. And Abner and the people lay all around him. Then Abishai said to David, God has delivered your enemy into your hand this day. Now therefore, please let me strike him at once with the spear, right to the earth. I will not have to strike him a second time. So Abishai is like, everyone's asleep. We snuck into this camp, literally walked straight to the center of the camp. No one has woken up, no one's seen you. And here's Saul with his spear, which is a symbol of his authority as king, right by his head. And Abishai says, David, God has delivered your enemies into your hand. Let me take Saul's spear and kill him with his own spear. He says, I won't even have to hit him twice. I will pin him to the ground. Which is interesting, those words, because if you remember, Saul's thought whenever they were in the palace was, I will pin David to the wall. Mm-hmm. And so now Abishai is saying, I will pin him to the ground. And it seems like this is the perfect opportunity for David. But look at David's response. He says, But David said to Abishai, Do not destroy him, for who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? David said furthermore, As the Lord lives, the Lord shall strike him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall go out to battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. But please, take now the spear and the jug of water that are by his head, and let us go. So David took the spear and the jug of water by Saul's head, and they got away. No man saw it, or knew, or awoke, for they were all asleep, because the deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon them. So he literally goes in, and he says, let's not kill him, but we need proof that we were here and we spared his life. So grab the spear and the jug of water that's right next to his head, because even now people like to sleep with cups of water by their head. Happened back then too. He had his jug of water right next to his head. And so they get those, and this is interesting because David commands Abishai to get it, but they attribute the act to David because he was the commander. And so that's something to always keep in mind whenever you're reading that in the Bible where it says David did this or Saul did this. It doesn't mean that necessarily that they personally did it, but they ordered it to be done. Therefore, they did it. And so David was like, you can't destroy him. He's the Lord's anointed. You can't kill him because no one can lift his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless. That's just, you can't do it. And so he says, as the Lord lives, as God lives, either God will strike him, similar to Nabal, his regular old day to die will come, or he'll go out to battle and die. One of these is going to happen. Something's going to happen to him, but I'm not going to order him killed, and I won't let anyone with me kill him. I will not raise my hand against him. And so they grab the spear, they grab the water jug, and they leave. And it says that no one knew it, no one awoke, because the deep sleep of the Lord was upon them. And sometimes I read that and I'm like, man, I really wish the deep sleep of the Lord would come upon me some nights. Because I would love to sleep that soundly. Just put me out for a while, Lord. And in verse 13 it says, Now David went over to the other side and stood on the top of a hill, afar off, a great distance being between them. And David called out to the people and to Abner the son of Ner, saying, Do you not answer, Abner? Then Abner answered and said, Who are you calling out to the king? So David literally, they snuck out of the camp. He goes and he finds a hill far enough away that he doesn't feel threatened. They can't catch him. They can't shoot him with an arrow or anything. So he stands on this hill and starts yelling at him. Why aren't you answering me? Answer me. Wake up. I need to talk to you. Wake up. And finally, people start waking up. And he starts calling out. Now, think about this. They slept soundly enough to where David and Abishai had a conversation right next to Saul. No one woke up. So David's out on this hill yelling at him. Finally, they get roused, and Abner doesn't recognize who it is. He says, "Who are you to call out to the king? Who are you?" And in verse 15, it says, "So David said to Abner, 'Are you not a man? And who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not guarded your lord the king? For one of the people came in to destroy your lord the king. This thing that you have done is not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die, because you have not guarded your master, the Lord's anointed. See now where the king's spear is, and where the jug of water that was by his head.'" So he starts reprimanding Abner. He's saying, "Aren't you a man? You call yourself a man? Who's like you in all Israel? You're the commander of all the army. Why didn't you guard the king? You didn't set up guards. You didn't guard him yourself. You fell asleep. Someone came into your camp to destroy your king. As the Lord lives, you're not fit to live. You should be punished by death for what you've done." I mean, David's just laying it all out. And he says, "You want to know that I'm telling the truth? Where's the spear and the jug of water?" And so it says in verse 17, "Then Saul knew David's voice, and he said, 'Is that your voice, my son David?' And David said, 'It is my voice, my lord, O king.'" Notice from this point on, he's not calling him my father.
Yeah.
Once, some of the commentators reference the fact that once Saul admitted that David was going to be king, David never again calls him father.
Interesting.
But he says, "Is that my voice? It is my voice, my lord, O king." And he said, "Why does my lord thus pursue his servant? For what have I done, or what evil is in my hand? Now therefore, please, let my lord the king hear the words of his servant. If the Lord has stirred you up against me, let him accept an offering. But if it is the children of men, may they be cursed before the Lord. For they have driven me out this day from sharing in the inheritance of the Lord, saying, 'Go serve other gods.' So now, do not let my blood fall to the earth before the face of my Lord, or before the face of the Lord. For the king of Israel has come out to seek a flea, as when one hunts a partridge in the mountains." So he says, "It is me. It's me, David, Lord King." He always gives Saul the titles and the respect of the kingship. He says, "It is my voice, my Lord, O King." He says, "Why are you pursuing me? What evil have I done?" He says, "Now listen to my words. If the Lord has stirred you up against me, I'll make a sacrifice to him. And I will ask for forgiveness from God if that's who's stirring you up. However, if it's the sons of men, if it's man that's stirring you up against me," he says, "let them be cursed before God, because they're telling me that I can't live in the land of Israel." And being that that's the inheritance of the children of God, in a way that's the same as telling him he can't serve God. Go find some other God to serve. He says, so they're driving me away from God himself. He says, so may they be cursed of God. Now, who keeps inciting Saul against him? The Ziphites. This is the second time they've done it. And each time they do it, Saul comes out with 3,000 men to hunt David. And so he's like, may they be cursed from God, because they're telling me to get away and to go serve other gods. He says, but who have you come out to attack? You're searching for one as a flea like me. In other words, I'm so insignificant. I'm like a flea. He says, and you're hunting me as one hunts a partridge in the mountains. And so you're going in pursuit. You're searching, you're hunting. He's like, I'm insignificant. Why? And then Saul said in verse 21, I have sinned. Return, my son David, For I will harm you no more, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Indeed, I have played the fool and erred exceedingly. And so he says, I've sinned. You can come back home, David. David's fallen for that once. He says, you can return, my son David. I will harm you no more. My life was precious in your eyes. Indeed, I have played the fool. Now remember, a lot of people saw the tie-in between Nabal and Saul and saw it kind of like a parallel story. Now Saul is admitting, I've been a fool. He's taking that name upon himself. Just like Nabal was named Nabal. Fool. And so you kind of see those parallels of where they get that from. He says, I've erred exceedingly. And in verse 22, I love that, Come back home, David. I won't do this again, I promise.
Yeah.
David answered and said, Here is the king's spear. Let one of the young men come over and get it. May the Lord repay every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord delivered you into my hand today. But I would not stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. And indeed, as your life was valued much this day in my eyes, so let my life be valued much in the eyes of the Lord, and let him deliver me out of all my tribulation. So this is interesting because David realizes that there's no way Saul is going to leave him alone.
Right.
He says, here's your spear back, the symbol of your authority in this army, the king's spear. He says, let one of your young men, one of your young soldiers, come over and get it. I'm not afraid of them. I'm a man of war. I beat Goliath. Send one person over. Not to mention David has his 600 with him.
Yeah.
So he's like, let one of the young men come get your spear. You notice he doesn't offer the water back? He says, you can come get the spear, but I drank the water.
Dude. I was thirsty.
Oh, this speech has made me thirsty. I'm going to need that water. But he says, come and get it. He says, and may the Lord repay everyone who is righteous and does what is right. He says, because the Lord delivered you into my hand, but I would not lift my hand against you. My righteousness. May the Lord show goodness on the one who is righteous. In other words, he's not blessing Saul by any means. He's saying, may God take care of me. He said, because he says, I would not stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. He says, and your life was valued much this day in my eyes. Therefore, let my life be valued not in your eyes, but in the eyes of God. And he will deliver me from all my tribulation that you're bringing against me. That's the unsaid part. God is going to deliver me from you. That's what I know. And in verse 25 it says, Then Saul said to David, May you be blessed, my son David. You shall both do great things and also still prevail. So David went on his way, and Saul returned to his place. So this is the end of this chapter. We're going to go ahead and do chapter 27 because it's real short as well. But once again, Saul recognizes David. He says, May you be blessed, David, because you are more righteous than I. I agree with what you just said. May the righteous one be blessed, and that's you. So he blesses David. He says, you're both going to do great things, and you will still prevail. And so they split up. Saul goes back to his place, but David doesn't go back. David's not about to go back where Saul has tried to kill him. What is this, 5 times at this point? I mean, this is getting a little repetitive. And so David's like, yeah, okay, you go ahead. I'll meet you there, right? So they kind of split ways. And in chapter 27, verse 1, it says, And David said in his heart, Now I shall perish someday by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than I should speedily escape to the land of the Philistines, and Saul will despair of me to seek me anymore in any part of Israel. So I shall escape out of his hand. Then David arose and went over with the 600 men who were with him to Achish, the son of Moach, the king of Gath. So David dwelt with Achish at Gath. he and his men, each man with his household, and David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail the Carmelitess, Nabal's widow. Then it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he sought him no more. So Saul leaves, and David starts thinking as he's standing there and kind of getting ready to leave and all that. He says, one day I'm not going to be fast enough, and Saul is going to get me. And he's just going to kill me. Because he's tried to kill me about 5-6 times now. So, what better is it for me than if I leave the land of Israel? I might as well go dwell among the Philistines, because then if Saul comes with an army, the Philistines are going to attack. So the Philistines will kind of be a guard for me. So David, guess where he decides to go? He goes back to Achish, the king of Gath. Remember the last time he saw Achish? He pretended to be a madman, started scratching on the doors like a crazy person, let spit dribble down his beard. I mean, all this weird stuff to make, and Achish was like, get this guy away from me, he's crazy. I don't need another crazy man. And so, this is the same guy. David goes back to Achish, only this time, David's not alone. The first time he was alone, and he was afraid that the Philistines were going to kill him because he killed their giant. He killed Goliath. So now, David comes with 600 men, soldiers, and they all have households. They have wives, they have children, it's not just David and 600 men, and they all go to the principal city in Gath, to King Achish, and they stay there with him. And Achish is accepting of David. So I don't know what kind of reconciliation happened there, but I mean, I'm sure David was like, yeah, I was scared of you, so I pretended to be crazy. It worked, though. I got away from you. You didn't kill me. But I'm here now, And so they've kind of formed this alliance, and he's staying in the main city with Achish, which in this time frame and even in medieval times, that was what they did. If an unknown force came, they didn't let you stay out somewhere else. You needed to stay close to the king, because that way he had his army there, and if you decided to attack anyone, he had immediate recourse to come after you. You're out in the village somewhere where he can't reach, you could kill off half of his population before he could get an army out there. So that's the idea. He's keeping him close at the moment. And once again, if you remember what I said last week, it mentions Ahinoam the Jezreelitess before Abigail, which every time they mention them together, Ahinoam is first. So they think that David actually took Ahinoam as a wife before Nabal's widow, Abigail. So that's where that comes into play. And so Saul still has spies out there, and they say, hey, you know where David is now? And Saul probably immediately started, call the soldiers, we'll find him. Right? And he's like, he went to the Philistines. He went to Gath. And Saul's like, well, I can't go attack Gath. Because not only am I fighting David's 600 men now I'm fighting the army of the Philistines. He's like, so I can't do that. So Saul stops pursuing David at this point. Then David, in verse 5, said to Achish, if I have now found favor in your eyes, let them give me a place in some town in the country, that I might dwell there. For why should your servant dwell in the royal city with you? So Achish gave him Ziklag that day. Therefore Ziklag has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. Now the time that David dwelt in the country of the Philistines was 1 full year and 4 months. So David finally goes to King Achish and he tells him, look, me and my 600 men, we don't need to be in the royal city with you. If I'm okay, you can see that I'm not going to attack you guys. Give me a country town to dwell in. I'm feeling kind of walled up in this principal city, and I'm not worthy to be in the principal city with you. And so Achish gives him Ziklag. And the interesting thing is that Ziklag is actually in the territory given to Simeon, the tribe of Simeon, which is inside the territory of Judah. And so the way it was set is Simeon was a very small tribe, and so they got a portion of land that was completely surrounded by the clan of Judah. But Ziklag is right inside Simeon's territory. But the Philistines, who still owned the property at the moment, because no one has fully claimed their territory, the Philistines, Achish, gives him the territory of Ziklag. He says, this city is now yours. That stays the king's property throughout the history of the kingdom of Israel. That stays in the hands of David's children. Ziklag is David's. And so he goes out and he stays there, and he stays with the Philistines from the time he gets to Gath till the time everything's finished and he leaves. He stays in the territory of the Philistines a full year and 4 months. That's how long it takes to get everything back to where it's supposed to be in God's eyes. And in verse 8 it says, and David and his men went up and raided the Jeshurites, the Gerizzites, and the Amalekites. For those nations were the inhabitants of the land from old, as you go towards Shur, even as far as the land of Egypt. So it kind of gives you an idea of where they are. Whenever David attacked the land, he left neither man nor woman alive, but took away the sheep, the oxen, the donkeys, the camels, and the apparel, and returned and came to Achish. Then Achish would say, where have you made a raid today? And David would say, against the southern area of Judah, or against the southern area of the Jehoramalites, or against the southern area of the Kenites. David would save neither man or woman alive to bring news to Gath, saying, lest they should inform on us, saying, thus David did. And thus was his behavior all the time that he dwelt in the country of the Philistines. So Achish believed David, saying, he has made his people Israel utterly abhor him. Therefore he will be my servant forever. So David isn't attacking the Israelites like he tells Achish, but he's also not attacking the Philistines. He's attacking the groups other than the Philistines who have been there since before Moses came with the children of Israel. So he's actually gaining favor with the Israelites because these are the ones that would come and attack them. So he's just constantly raiding, and he would go and he would attack a city and he would utterly destroy it, just like Moses told them to in the beginning. He would go in, he would kill every man, woman, and child, and he would get the plunder. Now David's motives weren't, well, that's what God told us to do. David's motives were, I don't want anyone to tell the Philistines that I'm not attacking Judah. I want them to think I'm attacking Judah. That way they think they can trust me more and more. And his ploy works. I mean, David is literally just growing his area of influence, I guess, and kind of destroying these cities that are known for attacking the Israelites. And he's just wiping them out, wiping out city after city after city. For a year and 4 months he's been doing this. And the whole time, the Philistines think that where he's getting all this stuff is Israel. And so David's gaining favor with Achish. But what Achish doesn't realize is he's also getting favor with Judah.
Yeah.
And so they're all kind of coming around. And David, I know Solomon is known as the wisest person to ever have lived. And that's politically. No man that has 1,000 wives can be called the wisest man in all situations. But
Not counting
sorry, but that's just not the smartest thing to do. But politically, Solomon was the most understanding, most knowledgeable person that has ever lived, even in today's societies. However, militarily, David is incredibly smart.
Yeah.
God himself calls David a man of war, and he's good at what he does. And so he's using this prowess to get both sides to like him and not become enemies, flat out enemies of anyone who really has the power to stop him. And so he's using that, and for a year and 4 months, he's just building up his strength, building up his strength, building up his strength. And so at that time, we're going to see what happens next time, because we have a new situation arise here, and we're almost at the end of 1 Samuel. And so we see the story continue, and God's promises start to take place right in these last few chapters. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for today, Lord. Thank you for all the good things you've done and the blessings you give us. Lord, I thank you that you've given us this example that even whenever our enemies are delivered over to us, Lord, however you want to interpret that in our lives, Lord, that we need to still trust in you and still depend on you for guidance and wisdom on how to handle the situations. We don't let ourselves be run over, but at the same time, we don't lift our hand against those that you've put in authority. We let you take care of it because you are the one that's in control of all of that. Father, I pray, Lord Jesus, that you would take care of us. You would give us wisdom and understanding, and you would help us to depend on you and to trust in you in everything we say and do. Father, help us to be good witnesses. Help us to go out from here safely and come back safely next week. I thank you for everything you've done. In Jesus' name we pray.